I'm going to be talking about some of the health issues associated with both wired and wireless technology. Last year, 4 of us went to the Commonwealth Club of California. We were on a panel, and the panel was called Public Health SOS, the Shadow Side of the Wireless Revolution. Camilla Reese and I, Magda Havas, are the co-authors of this book that came out, and it came out based on the questions that we received from the audience. Cindy Sage and Dr. David Carpenter were the 2 other panel members that participated in this conversation. There was so much interest that we couldn't answer their questions in the time that we were allowed, and so we decided to write written answers to those questions, and they now appear in a book called Public Health SOS, the Shadow Side of the Wireless Revolution, and it's now available at Amazon.com for anyone who would like a copy of it. Why are people concerned about this? How do people actually come to this issue? Well, they come to this issue from 2 different sources. One is technology and the other is health. Parents are becoming increasingly concerned about Wi-Fi in schools. They're concerned about their children using cell phones and speaking on them for hours each day. They're concerned about antennas coming into their neighborhoods, and they're concerned about transmission lines near their homes as well. And when they go to the literature and try to read about this, initially the concerns for things like antennas and transmission lines are primarily because they don't want them near their homes. They look ugly, it reduces property values, and that's usually what brings them to doing some research. And very quickly they find that there's all sorts of health concerns associated with this technology, and that's what really gets them motivated. The other thing that brings people to this issue are individuals who have all sorts of health problems, whether it's migraines or chronic pain or chronic fatigue, or whether they have cancer in the family, or whether they have difficulty conceiving, or whether their children have autism or attention deficit disorder or some learning ability. And once again, they go to the internet and do some research, and they find that some of these illnesses are actually associated with the wireless and wired technology. There's a connection between technology and health, and these are the 2 different spectrums that bring people to the issue. When scientists first started looking at illness as it relates to electromagnetic energy, it was a real puzzle. And they got part of the picture to the puzzle by looking at electromagnetic fields. And what they found was that there was an increased risk of childhood leukemia for children who either lived near power lines or had high magnetic fields in the home environment. I'm not going to talk very much about this, although I think it's very important research. Other scientists were looking at microwave radiation, and they found that there were brain tumors associated with cell phone use, and there was something called microwave illness or microwave sickness for people who happen to live near radar towers, radar installations. And so that became the other part of this puzzle. Other people were looking at ground current, particularly on farms. It was affecting farm animals, particularly dairy cows where milk production decreased. They had foot sores, they miscarried, and some of the animals died prematurely. And once again, we were given a piece of the puzzle. It wasn't only the animals on the farms that were ill, but the farm families were ill and had the same symptoms as the cows. And then finally, we started looking at sick building syndrome and found that some of the sick building syndrome isn't due to mold, isn't due to chemicals, it's actually due to power quality or dirty electricity. And so I think these are the 4 most important parts of the illness puzzle of the 21st century. Ever since electricity was invented and we started using electric lights, every 10 to 20 years, new devices came on the market, from the wireless radio to radar during World War II to television and computers. And one of the things you can see here is that although the advances took decades initially, right now we have a lot of different products coming online that are using wireless technology. And I'll talk about them very briefly in a few minutes. Every single time we had a new invention, we had health effects associated with it. And I'd just like to focus on one of these. Collectively, the radiation that I'm going to be talking about in the electromagnetic fields, I refer to as electrosmog. It's just an easy terminology. There's nothing technical or scientific about it. With respect to the invention of X-rays, we now know that X-rays are not good for your health. We limit the number of X-rays people have. The intensity of the X-ray is much lower than it used to be in the past, and technicians usually walk out of the room where the X-ray machine is being operated because of their health. However, when X-rays were first invented, they were used in shoe stores. Now, how many people remember X-rays being used in shoe stores? Okay. And they were used to help fit children's shoes. It was very difficult to tell how, where the toes ended and where the shoe started. Children's feet grow very rapidly, so very often you wanted the shoe to last at least a year. And so what you would do is you would have something called a fluoroscope, which is basically an X-ray machine, and the child would put his foot under it, wiggle his toes, and you could see where the toes were, you could see where the outline of the shoe was, and you could determine whether or not the shoe fit. And we used that technology until we recognized that X-rays were harmful. This, in my opinion, was a frivolous use of a technology, and thank God we learned very quickly. However, we have frivolous uses of the wireless technology we have, and the question is, what are the consequences going to be? What are the long-term benefits or the effects of this technology? Here is some of that new wireless technology. We have cordless phones, we have cell phones. There's a very special type of cordless phone that I'm going to be talking about later on. We're increasingly going to wireless routers rather than wired routers to get on the internet. And there's a new phone that's coming out that you wear as a wristwatch, and it's called a touchscreen cell phone watch. And what that's going to do is it's going to irradiate your wrist and the rest of your body with microwave radiation, because that's what it uses. There's also Wi-Fi hotspots now. Hotels, when they're trying to invite corporate people coming to their hotels, they indicate that they have wireless available at the hotel. And this is something that is very enticing. For people who have developed a sensitivity to this, this is when they check off one hotel not to go to, because they find that they often can't sleep in and they have a terrible night's sleep. We also have something coming very soon called WiMAX. This is absolutely horrible, much worse than Wi-Fi hotspots. And this is an antenna, a very powerful antenna, that will have a radius of 50 kilometers. So they can put this outside of a city. It will absolutely blanket the city so that everyone can have the convenience of using their wireless internet. Just doesn't make any sense at all. There's also research being done putting broadband over power lines. This is using power lines for data transmission. Power lines were originally designed for transport of electricity, not for data. They're not shielded like the cables that come into your home from television stations that are shielded. Those cables are shielded not to protect you, they're shielded to protect the message that is going through those wires. So there's going to be all sorts of problems once communities start having broadband over power lines. And the most recent thing are smart meters. In Ontario, by 2010, every building is going to have a smart meter. These smart meters are designed to allow the utility to determine how much electricity you're using almost a minute-by-minute basis. A lot of them are going to use wireless technology, which means that they will send that signal to the nearest antenna, which could be 2 kilometers away, and that's going to be sent to your utility, and they will know exactly how much energy you're using when. The advantage to you is that if you use your electricity at nighttime, the fees will go down, so it won't cost you nearly as much. The disadvantage is that it's probably ultimately going to affect your health. In communities in the United States, people have contacted me who are electrically sensitive, and they told me that they now have wireless smart meters on their home, and they can't use the room where the wireless meter is on the outside wall. They can't use that room anymore. And it's not just their home, but it's homes around them that are sending these messages. If you happen to be living in an apartment building, then your exposure is going to be that much worse. So the denser the community of the buildings, the worse the radiation is going to be. This talk could have very well been titled Beyond Noah's Ark, because I think the flood analogy makes a lot of sense and it helps people understand what we're exposed to. If the level of water is low, at our knees or lower, it's unlikely that it's going to kill us. If it's higher, and if some of us can't swim, then we're going to end up having problems. And this is the present situation. There are some people who are exposed to current levels of electromagnetic radiation who are unable to survive. They become very, very ill. Many of them have moved away from civilization. Many of them have come to British Columbia and live on the islands where they are trying to get away, living a very, very healthy lifestyle until the radiation follows them with the cell phone antennas. And this is what's coming soon. The levels are going to go up unless we do something about it, and more people are going to become ill. Now, last time I spoke, I used this slide because I think it helps us understand what we're talking about. This area is incredibly complex. It took me years before I could even begin to understand it, and it's changing so quickly that I have to do my research almost on a daily basis to keep up with some of the changes that are going on. So I'm going to try to simplify it for you so that you can actually follow this and understand it rather than just listen to people talking about it and accepting what they have to say. This is called the electromagnetic spectrum, and it's based on frequency. So we have low frequencies down here and high frequencies up here. Scientists have given terms to different parts of the spectrum to make it easy for them to discuss different frequencies. Down here we have something known as extremely low frequency. Then we have a large range called radio frequency, which overlaps with microwaves and radar. We then have infrared radiation that causes heating that many of us are aware of. Visible light is part of the spectrum, and then we have ultraviolet radiation. X-rays are part of the spectrum, and gamma radiation. The frequencies that are above this line are called ionizing. We know they can damage DNA, and scientists around the world know that these energies are harmful. We have another range in here where there's heating effect, and we know that heating of the body, if it's consistent and large enough, can also cause harm. These three parts of the spectrum have been labeled ionizing, thermal, and non-thermal. We have excellent guidelines in Canada for ionizing radiation that protects us. We have good guidelines that protects us against thermal effects. We have absolutely no guidelines that protect us against the non-thermal effects. Here we have three different frequency bands that research has been conducted in. The first one is the low frequency that I mentioned to you relating to power lines. We have an intermediate frequency band called dirty electricity that I'll be talking about, and we have high frequencies in the microwave band that have also been studied, showing adverse health effects. You can see that all three of these fall within the non-thermal guidelines, for which we have none in Canada. Now, the first part of the puzzle, childhood leukemia and power lines. I'm not going to be mentioning this. I'm only going to show you one slide. You have so many power lines in British Columbia, these transmission lines that crisscross the province, and people are living far too close to them. There's a community in Tawasin that is actually fighting the government and the industry regarding the closeness of homes to these power lines. When I first got interested in this, my husband was visiting his brother in Wales, and he came home one night and told me an interesting story. They were out walking the dog late one night, and they were walking near a nuclear power plant that had these high voltage transmission lines coming from the power plant. And my brother-in-law, Malcolm, who's a mechanical electrical engineer, he pulled out a fluorescent tube from under his coat and he held it up, and the light lit up under the power line. And so my husband came home and told me the story, and I got all excited. We had power lines just down the road from us. I unscrewed the fluorescent tube from under the kitchen sink. I went out late at night and I held it up, and the light lit up. And it lit up to right where I touched it. So if I grabbed the tube in the middle, only the top part lit up and the bottom part stayed dark. This is an example of what happens. These are fluorescent tube lights that are simply stuck in the ground under a high voltage transmission line, and they're glowing. So you can read by them. Now, earlier today, Sharon drove me there near the site for the new Belmont High School, and that's very close to a high voltage transmission line. It's near antennas as well. It's a place where a school should never be built. The area immediately under one of these high voltage transmission lines and adjacent to it is wasteland. They can't do anything with it, so now they're putting schools there. It's absolutely disgusting and shouldn't be allowed to happen. I'm going to focus on two parts of the puzzle, however. One part is looking at microwaves and the other part will be looking at dirty electricity. When it comes to microwave radiation, there's really two types of exposure that I'm concerned about. One is first-hand smoke, which is very similar to cigarette smokers, the ones who are smoking the cigarettes, and it comes from a lot of our mobile technology. The other is second-hand exposure. Just like someone in the same room with a smoker, you end up breathing in second-hand smoke. So cell phones, in my opinion, are the tobacco of the 21st century. We know that when it comes to cigarette smoking and lung cancer, the linkage was first made in 1912. The first quantitative study was in 1929, and it wasn't until the 1990s that we began to ban it from environments. So there are certain smoke-free environments available today. That took 80 years. If it takes us 80 years to make the link between what's happening now to a lot of people and the wireless industry, there are so many people who are going to become ill, it will make smoking a very insignificant part of the previous generation. Worldwide in 2006, we had 1.25 billion people who were smokers. 1.4 million of them will die of cancer. In 2005, there were over 2 billion cell phone subscribers. So it'll be interesting and disturbing to determine how many of them will be adversely affected. One of the most recent studies that has come out, and indeed this is an early copy of it, so I don't even have the page numbers for the printed copy yet, is a study that was done by Professor Leonard Hardell, who's an epidemiologist and is one of the leading experts in the world out of Sweden, looking at brain tumors and cell phone use. And this is a very recent study where he reviewed a number of studies. I'm just going to summarize the key findings from this particular report. He found that people who are moderate to heavy cell phone users who have used a cell phone for 10 years or longer have a statistically increased risk of developing glioma, which is a brain tumor, a 90% increase in that. Acoustic neuroma, which is a tumor that affects the auditory nerve that goes into your ear, 60% increase in risk. And uveal melanoma, which is a tumor of the eye, 320% increased risk for people who use cell phones. They're ipsilateral, which means they're on the same side of the head that you use a cell phone. So if you tend to hold it against your right ear, the tumors are going to occur on the right side of your head. If you hold it against your left ear, they're going to occur against the left side of your head. In this study, he found that if you were less than 20 years old when you first started using a cell phone, your risk increased substantially, and I think the percentage is about a 500% increase for brain tumors for under 20-year users, under the age of 20. Their conclusions are the current standard for exposure to microwaves during mobile phone use is not safe for long-term exposure, that's 10 years or more, and it needs to be revised. If you look at the studies that are conducted with money from the cell phone industry, what you will find is the studies will last for 6 years and then they're terminated. And what they're finding is basically there's no statistically significant increased risk. So they terminate the study before they can find anything. Normally for brain tumors, you have a latency period of anywhere from 20 to 30 years. The fact that they're showing up after 10 years is particularly disturbing. It's suggesting that the tumors are actually growing a lot more rapidly than they normally would. Children are especially sensitive to this. What we have here is a model from a paper by Dr. Gandhi. This is the skull of a 5-year-old child showing the cell phone here, and this shows you the degree of penetration into the skull. This is a 10-year-old child and this is an adult. In adults, we're finding a lot of the tumors are on the surface of the brain, and they're relatively easy to surgically remove. If you have a tumor in your midbrain, then that's going to be extremely difficult to remove surgically without causing brain damage. The reason children are so sensitive is their skulls absorb more energy. The tumors in the midbrain are more difficult and more deadly. Children are reproducing much more rapidly their cells, and because of that, the tumor grows much more rapidly. And that's true for brain tumors as well as for leukemia and any other kind of childhood cancer. Children's immune systems are not as well developed as adults, so they're going to be much more susceptible. And the lifetime exposure for a child in this society is going to be much higher. When I grew up, there was no such thing as a cell phone or a cordless phone or a wireless internet. So my body developed in a relatively electromagnetically clean environment. The same cannot be said for children today. And indeed, it's the wealthy families that can afford all the gadgets whose children are going to suffer the most. This study came out recently, and I'm going to measure mercury because there seems to be a relationship between mercury in your body and your sensitivity to electromagnetic energy. This is a study that just came out in 2008, and they found two very interesting things. They looked at people who were given magnetic resonance imaging, that's MRI. And with MRI, you're exposed to a very high magnetic field, a direct current magnetic field, and then a radio frequency is pulsed at you. And so you're exposed to both direct current and this very high frequency alternating current. They found that if they measured the saliva in a person before they went in for an MRI and measured the mercury in the saliva, and afterwards the mercury content was much, much higher. So it's believed that the radio frequency in the MRI is actually mobilizing, it's dissolving the mercury in your fillings and putting it into your saliva. You then swallow it and it becomes metabolized by your body. And so you're increasing, you're taking the mercury from a storage site, which is your filling, and making it physiologically available. They did another study, and they took college students who had some amalgam restoration work done. Everything in blue is the control population that didn't use a cell phone. Everything in purple is the population that did use a cell phone. And then they measured the mercury in the urine. And you can see here from day 0 to day 4, the amount of mercury in the urine was much higher. So it is being released into the body. Mercury is a neurotoxin, and for people who have fillings, it's very, very important for them to get the mercury out in a safe way if they don't want to have the mercury dissolve in their body. A colleague of mine had the misfortune of serving in Vietnam, and he was on radar operation. And one of the things he told me is that all the servicemen who were on radar had to have their fillings replaced every 6 months because they would become loose and they'd start jiggling. And what was happening there again is that the mercury was dissolving because they were exposed to very high microwave radiation. Several countries have recognized that cell phones are bad, and they've recommended warnings. The first one was in the United Kingdom, and it was called the Stewart Report. It came out in 2000. There was a lot of media attention, but other countries didn't follow suit until quite recently. Germany came out with a warning in 2007. All of these different countries and different institutions, the Toronto Board of Health, the Pittsburgh Cancer Institute issued cell phone warnings in 2008. And the most recent is Finland, with Nokia being a very powerful industry in Finland. And they came out with a warning in January of 2009. Nothing is coming from Industry Canada or Health Canada. Nothing is coming from the Federal Communication Commission in the United States. Both of these institutions are stating that using cell phones is perfectly safe based on the current guidelines that we have. I'm going to share with you a story about some of the research that we're doing, and it's not on a cell phone, it's on a cordless phone. There's this very special type of cordless phone called a DECT phone. DECT stands for Digital European Cordless Telephony. And I have one here, and I'm going to do a quick demonstration with it. This is a phone that will radiate whether or not you're using it. So as soon as you plug this phone into an electrical outlet, it will radiate. Whereas with your cell phone, it's only radiating when you're using it, when you're speaking and it's sending the message, or when you're receiving information. And I have someone who's going to help me with this demonstration. The first thing I'm going to do, not yet. The first thing I'm going to do, and can I get you just to stand beside me for a minute? This is a meter that measures radio frequency radiation, and I call it my Christmas tree. And basically it tells you where that source is coming from. So I can go around like this, and you can hear the sound. So the sound, I also have numbers here that are flashing, but the sound tells me where the radiation is coming from. Now I'm using wireless mics, so that's what some of this is. When I measured earlier, this room was perfectly clean. Here we have a DECT phone. It's an AT&T DECT phone, and I'm just going to ask Chris to plug it in. Can you hear that? This is off scale. This is how far I have to go for the best guideline in the world, the Salzburg guideline, which is 1/10,000th of the Canadian guideline. Okay. Now, there's also material there that has been designed to shield radio frequency radiation. I'm going to come a bit closer, and I'm just going to get you, Walter, to put it in between the two. Do you hear it go down? Move it away. Okay. This material, thank you very much. This material has silver lining in it, and people are buying it and putting it around their beds to shield themselves from radiation that's coming from outside. Can you imagine sleeping next to one of these and having your head irradiated all night? No wonder people can't sleep. People who are electrically sensitive tell me that they have a variety of symptoms, and one of the symptoms is arrhythmia. They say that they have this irregular heartbeat or a fluttering, and they're really worried that they're going to have a heart attack. And so we decided that we test their reaction. And so I've gone to a number of different communities from Colorado to California, New Mexico, Arizona, New York, California, Ontario, and we've actually had volunteers come in for testing. So we use this cordless phone, and this is the frequency that we had. It's a 2.4 gigahertz phone. Canada's Safety Code 6 guideline says that we can be exposed to 1,000 units. The units happen to be microwatts per centimeter squared for for a 6-minute period. And we used, the exposure was 3, so we're well below the Safety Code 6 guideline, and we exposed people for a 3-minute period. So theoretically, we weren't harming them at all. We put on a chest monitor, so we basically measured their heart rate. It's called a heart rate variability monitor. And we had them lie down on a bed. We took the DECT phone, put it about 2 feet away. We plugged it into a live outlet, and you had this radiation coming from it. We then plugged it into a dead outlet, and the radiation went away. So we were always plugging it in. The plugging it into a dead outlet is our placebo study, so it's our reference, what we compare things to. And this is what we started getting. Every time their heart beat, we got this little spike on the computer. And the spike is the time between beats. So anything that is a taller spike means a slower heart rate, and a shorter spike means a faster heart rate. This is one of the subjects that we tested. We've now tested about 90 people. Our aim is to do 100. We tested this one subject, and here we have continuous monitoring during stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. Each of these stages are 197 beats of the heart, so it's always standardized on the person rather than on time. And this is when we expose them to the cordless phone. And what we're trying to do is look at patterns with and without exposure. The beats per minute during this period, and this is roughly a 3-minute period, 58 beats per minute, 56, and 58. So you might say that, this dropped 2 beats per minute. My guess is that that's just normal variation, and we couldn't see anything really dramatic here either as well. This is another person that we exposed. Okay, can you guess when they were exposed to the cordless phone? That's when they were exposed to a cordless phone. What happened to their heart rate? It went from 68 beats a minute to 122 instantly. At this little red spot here, that's when we turned the phone on, and within a matter of a few beats, they started going into something called tachycardia, which is rapid heart rate. As soon as we unplugged it, they went back to normal. We plugged it back in again, they went into tachycardia. This, I think, we're hoping to have a paper coming out on this by this fall. This, I think, is absolutely definitive proof that it's not in your head. If anyone lying down can change their heart rate from 68 to 122, they're a miracle of science. So this was totally involuntary. One of the people who we tested, whenever we had this kind of response, I would tell the person about it after we completed the testing. And one of the women, I told what was happening to her heart when we were exposing her, and she started to cry. And she was telling me that sometimes she goes into a store and she feels incredible anxiety. Her heart just starts fluttering. She feels as though she's going to have a heart attack, and it scares the jeebies out of her. And when I told her this, I said, first of all, according to the heart rate variability, which tells us a lot about the health of the heart, her heart was incredibly healthy. There was nothing wrong with her. And so now she knows that she has to go away from that kind of environment. So when she feels her heart fluttering, she doesn't have to worry that she's going to have a heart attack. She has to realize that she's exposed to something and needs to get away from that exposure. So it's very empowering when you know that and you're not worried that you're going to suddenly keel over and die. What's the solution? Well, one of the solutions is to ban deck phones, and very, very recently, July 16th, today is what, July 22nd? Just 6 days ago, the Israeli government, the Minister of the Environment, has decided to ban any kind of device that radiates when it's not in use. And that means decked phones, it means decked baby monitors. Some people have these by the crib, listening to their babies, you know, in the middle of the night, and their children are being microwaved because of the exposure. And here it says, the new minister said, health consideration comes before any economic consideration, and we don't intend to compromise on that subject. And the reason for the banning, they say, is radiation with no justification. You only need radiation when you're using something. You don't need it when you're not using it. Having a deck phone in your home is probably worse than living near a cell phone antenna. So for those of you who have cordless phones in your home, try to find out if they're a decked phone or not, and if they are, get rid of them. And one of the ways you can do it without appropriate equipment for testing is you can take a radio, a portable radio, turn it to an AM station. At the low end of the AM scale, turn it slightly off station so you have static, and then bring it close to the base of your portable phone. And if you start getting more static as you bring it closer, chances are you've got DECT technology. And that's going to irradiate not only, you know, the room it's in, but it's going to irradiate other rooms. I accidentally had one in my home, which was really surprising because I thought they were limited to Germany. And a colleague of mine came over who was electrically sensitive, and he said, would you mind unplugging that while I'm here? And I said, no, not a problem. So I unplugged it. And after he left, I thought, well, I should test this. Maybe he just wanted it unplugged because it was wireless, or maybe there was some other reason. I was picking up this cordless phone that was in my kitchen. I was picking it up in my bedroom, and I didn't know I had one. I then found out that my neighbors bought one because suddenly I was getting radiation in my house. My house is, you know, 0.0001 on the radiation scale. I'm very fortunate. And suddenly I started picking it up. So I took my meter, my Christmas tree, and found exactly where they had it in their house and asked them if they could replace it with a wired phone or with non-DECT technology so that I wouldn't be irradiated. They also had two young kids, and it was certainly worthwhile for them to do that. Some recommendations for mobile phone use, they are minimize your use, maximize your distance. Text messaging is better than speaking because it's far away from your head, and it's only radiating when you're sending the text message. Using it in speaker mode is better because it's further away, and using an air tube headset. This is a headset that has a hollow tube going to your ear. We find that the ones that have the metal tube will actually radiate, give off radiation. It acts like an antenna, so they're actually worse. Change the side of your head. Don't keep a cell phone in your pocket or under your pillow. Don't keep it in a hip pocket if you happen to be male and you want to have children, because it affects sperm viability. Don't use it on planes, trains, buses, or cars, or anything that is shielding you from the antenna, because that's forcing the phone to work harder, so it powers up and you're exposed to much higher levels of radiation. Don't use it when the phone is in roaming mode, because it's telling you it's having a hard time finding an antenna. Use it outdoors or near antennas. Use landlines whenever possible. Discourage use by children and especially pregnant women, and get rid of any kind of DECT phone you might have. This also applies for any Wi-Fi wireless routers in your home or in your school. It's important to use wired internet as much as possible. Turn off wireless except when in use if you feel you have to have it. Don't place the wireless router in or near your bedroom. Lakehead University doesn't have any wireless on campus. I wish I could say the same for Trent University, but I can't. I've been trying to get them to remove wireless from student residences so that they could at least have a good night's sleep, and I haven't been successful. So I'm not successful in my own home university. The key message is wired is good, wireless is bad. So if you don't remember anything from this, that's one thing that would be worthwhile remembering. Now, what about secondhand exposure from antennas? This is a tower on top of a building in Toronto, and you can see all of the different antennas that are on this tower. At one stage, I tried to count them, and they were in the 20s. Towers, as soon as they are erected, become vertical real estate for antennas. So everyone wants to erect a tower, because then they can sell that tower to other distributors. The going rate in some areas is $1,000 per month per antenna. And if you see apartment buildings with 20, 30, 40 different antennas on there, they're making $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a month. They're probably making more than they do from renting units. They're also putting antennas on high voltage transmission towers. And this is probably the worst thing you can do. It's the best place to put them if you want to save money, because the tower is there already. All you have to do is put an antenna on it. So it's very inexpensive for the wireless provider. It's probably the worst place you can put them from a health perspective. And the reason is that these wires become antennas for the radio frequency. And if you have appropriate meters, you'll measure the tower, and then you'll go along the transmission line, and that's radiating the same frequency. So you really don't want antennas put on towers, and there's quite a few already here on the island. The providers initially assumed that, well, if people can't see it, they won't complain. And so they began to disguise them as trees. This is a palm tree. Okay, that entire tree-looking structure is an antenna tower. Can you guess which cypress is the fake cypress? It's the one in the middle that looks perfect. And this entire tree is not a pine tree, it's a tower, and it has antennas on top. And usually one of the ways that you can distinguish these trees from real trees is that birds won't fly in them. They won't land in them at all. They tend to stay away. Now, how do antennas work? Well, they're usually aimed downward, and if you're within the beam, then you're being exposed, and they reflect off of objects. So they will reflect off of brick, off the ground, and there's also areas where you have shadow regions. So if you're standing here, in the shadow region, you won't be exposed to the radiation. But in reality, this is what they look like. They have lobes on them, and they're also facing downward. And where they come incident to the ground and where these side lobes are is where you end up having the highest radiation. So even though within this beam it decreases with distance, as you're walking along the ground, you can have it going up and down, depending on things that are reflecting the radiation and depending on the structure of the antenna. And when you start putting more and more antennas, this is what it would look like if we could see it. So you can see why the term electrosmog actually makes a lot of sense. A few years ago in San Diego, they had a fire station, and it wasn't Fire Station 101. I should just put that on the slide. And they put on a cell phone antenna on top of the fire station. And the firefighters started to complain of ill health. And this was within less than 5 years of the exposure. They did extensive medical testing, including brain scans. They found that the firefighters were complaining of confusion, short-term memory loss, inability to focus, migraine headaches, insomnia, brain fog, infertility, slowed reaction time, depression, tremors, and vertigo. Can you imagine a firefighter with vertigo who comes in to try to save your life from a burning building, and he gets so dizzy that he's physically ill from his vertigo? After this study was completed, some of the firefighters banded together, and they came up with a resolution that was actually passed in Boston at one of the International Association firefighter meetings. That includes firefighters from Canada, the United States, and Mexico. This is their resolution, and it has been passed. The International Association of Firefighters opposed the use of fire stations as base stations for antennas and towers for the conduction of cell phone transmissions until such installations are proven not to be hazardous to the health of our members. They don't want to wait until the federal government says, yes, now we're totally convinced, 20, 30 years down the road, yeah, we should have done something earlier, but we didn't, and we're sorry about that. They don't want them on the fire halls until they're proven to be safe. These people are willing to go into a burning building, they're willing to risk their lives to save others, and they don't want to be exposed to this radiation unnecessarily. They're not benefiting by the cell phone antennas being on top of their stations. One of the key reasons they're concerned is a lot of them do drills on top of a fire station, so they go up very, very close to the antenna. When they do rappelling off the building, and when they have something called a hose tower. So their hoses, after they use them, they have to dry them and they have to hang them up. So they have to go very, very close to these antennas. So it's actually worse for them than it would be for any of us. This is a photograph I took in Prague at a conference that the World Health Organization had, and I was just amazed at how many antennas they had. And you can see buildings, people who are living here, who are working here, who are exposed to the radiation as long as they're in the building. In Canada, we have a guideline. It's called Safety Code 6, and it's the 6-minute average thermal effects guideline, which means that they take a reading for a 6-minute period and they take the average of that. So the reading might be going high, it might be going low. They just take the average, and if that average is below the Safety Code 6 guideline, then it's deemed to be safe. It's based on the heating of your body fluids, and the assumption is if it doesn't heat your body, it is perfectly safe. And we now know that to be totally nonsense. The guidelines in Canada are 1,000 microwatts per centimeter squared. The Russian guidelines are 10. And the best guidelines we have in the world come from Salzburg, Austria, and they're 0.1. Liechtenstein just adopted the 0.1 guideline as well, and they were threatened by the cell phone industry, and the government said, we care more about our health than we care about the money that you bring into this country. So they've taken a very powerful stance. Canada has no long-term guidelines for radio frequency radiation. The 6-minute guideline doesn't make any sense even for someone who uses a cell phone, because we tend to use it longer than 6 minutes. Can you imagine living in this building and being exposed for 8 hours? There is nothing that will protect you based on the Canadian guideline. I'm going to repeat this because it's incredibly important. Canada has no long-term guidelines for radio frequency radiation. Now, we talked a little bit about how antennas work and how they reflect off of objects. I'm going to share with you a few other bits of information that will help you understand this, because we can't see it or hear it or feel it, so we have to use something that we are familiar with. And because light is part of the electromagnetic spectrum, if you understand how light works, then you can understand how microwaves work. And for light, we know that it can be transmitted through windows, for example, while microwaves can be transmitted through buildings. That's why you can use your phone inside, even though the antenna is outside. That energy comes right through brick and concrete. Light can be reflected off of things like a mirror. Microwaves can be reflected, and the things that are most conductive are the best at reflecting. So metal is a good reflector. If you take metal and put it into your microwave oven, what will happen? Unfortunately, I've done it a few times by accident. It starts to spark, right? It's actually reflecting that radiation and it's sparking. Light can be focused. We can take a magnifying glass and we can actually start a fire with it. If you have a frame of metal, it can actually focus the microwave radiation. So depending on what the shape of objects are, the microwaves can be focused. And we know that it can be absorbed. So if you have dark material or light material in terms of light, the dark will get hot very fast because it's absorbing. The white is reflecting a lot of the radiation. What absorbs microwaves? What are the things we put in our oven that we can heat up with a microwave?
Water.
Anything that has water in it, right? So the human body, 70% water. So we're really good at absorbing microwave energy. Now, because metal can reflect this, if the microwaves are coming from the left side of that filing cabinet, it can actually shield you. However, if there's a tower outside and they're coming from outside, then you can actually get a double whammy. And we actually measured this in a hospital in Ontario. This was the exact configuration, and the levels coming off of the metal filing cabinet increased the person's exposure. And what he ended up doing is he ended up moving his desk. If we take that fabric that I just showed you earlier with the decked phone and put it on the window, we can actually minimize or reduce about 99% of the radiation coming in. So if it's something coming from outside your home, you can actually shield yourself from it to a certain degree. And this is how people are using the fabric. They're putting it around the cribs, they're putting it around beds. If you do decide to go this route, first of all, I must tell you it's very expensive because we're talking about silver fiber. And you have to do it professionally or properly. You have to do the measurement inside the bed because, once again, just imagine that instead of radiation, you're using light, and imagine that this fabric is a mirror and you get a little pinhole of light coming through. What will happen to that? It'll bounce off of everything, and so it'll cook you, okay? So it won't cook you, but it'll make it worse. So it's really important that you have anything like this done professionally as well. And these are the two places where you can buy the fabric, safelivingtechnologies.ca and lessemf.com in the United States. Other things to keep in mind. If you have metal rimmed glasses, it can focus the radiation. If you have a pacemaker, any other kind of metal in or on your body, metal fillings, jewelry, an underwire bra is probably the worst shape for focusing microwave radiation, right? It's probably going to focus it right into the breast. And copper IUDs, for anyone still using that technology, terrible. What might happen in the future with something like that. There have been 6 epidemiological studies that have looked at the health effects of cell phone antennas, and I'm just going to very quickly give you the key information from these studies. 2 of them focused on cancer, 4 of them looked at electro-hypersensitivity that I'll describe in a minute. The critical point here is that the critical distance was 350 meters or 400 meters for these 2 studies, which is very similar to 300 meters for electrosensitivity in a study in Spain. So when people ask me, what is the safe distance? The answer is, I don't know. But if you needed a guideline, it would be at least beyond 400 meters. That would be, a good first step. However, once again, depending on what the building's made of and whether there's metal that's reflecting things, if you have a metal roof, for example, that will actually reflect the radiation back. So if your neighbors have a metal roof, your exposure could actually be much higher. The other critical thing here is the study in Austria. The highest exposure that they recorded was 0.4 microwatts per centimeter squared when Canada's guideline is 1,000. So you could see that that 1,000 guideline actually has absolutely no effect. This is one of the Spanish studies that was published in 2002. And here what we have, and everything in red is within 10 meters of a cell phone antenna, all the way out to 300 meters in black. The height of the bars tells you the percentage of respondents experiencing symptoms very often. The first symptom is fatigue. 70% of the people who lived within 10 meters or 30 feet of a cell phone antenna experienced fatigue very often. That dropped to 27 who were at a distance of 300 meters. And if you look at these symptoms in order, the first one's fatigue, followed by sleep disturbance, headaches, feeling of discomfort, difficulty concentrating, depression, memory loss. Remember, these were the same symptoms the firefighters complained about in the firefighters study. Visual disruptions, irritability, hearing disruptions, very often a buzzing in the ears or a tinnitus type of effect. Skin problems, cardiovascular, and it goes on. I don't call this electro-hypersensitivity, I call it rapid aging syndrome, because that's what the symptoms resemble. It's as though you're aging. And that's very often how people say, well, I'm only aging, or I'm under a lot of stress, and so these symptoms are quite normal. A few years ago, I was in Bermuda with a colleague of mine, Dave Stetzer, who's an electrician, an electrical contractor, and a power quality expert. And he and I were invited down to show some of the people down there how to measure radiation coming from cell towers. There's a lot of towers on the island. And when we were waiting for our colleagues to arrive, Dave was sitting, we were in my hotel room, and Dave was sitting in this chair next to a lamp that was a brass lamp. And he's sitting there and he's saying, you know, I'm not feeling really well here. And I said, well, you know, is it something you ate? What could it be? And he said, oh, I think it's electromagnetic. And Dave and I have become very good friends. And of course, I'm concerned about his health. And my reaction was, oh, good. We can find out what it is, and then we can use it as a teaching tool for the people that we're going to be teaching. So he wasn't too thrilled with me, but we began to whip out our meters because we had a lot of the technology with us. And one of the first meters I pulled out was this Christmas tree, so we can actually find out the direction that it's coming from. And so I pulled that one out, and we found that there was kitty corner to this room. There was an antenna. We could see the top of it. It was several kilometers away. And I said, oh, I've got it. It's coming from there. And he says, no. He said, I think it's something in the room. It seems to be worse when I'm sitting in this chair. And so he pulled out a meter, a little one, that measured the high-frequency electric field coming off the lamp. There should be no high-frequency electric field coming off a lamp. This lamp is at 60 cycles per second. That's our electricity. It shouldn't have high frequencies. And he's holding it towards the lamp, and I bent over to have a look at what the meter was reading, and the reading went down. So I moved away, and the reading went up. And I looked again, and the reading went down. And I said, oh, I must be blocking it. And he said, no. He said, you're absorbing it. So we found that the lamp was radiating a high frequency, the wire was radiating a high frequency, and the bed I was sleeping on was radiating a high frequency. Now, what could it be coming from the bed? The springs, the coils, beautiful antennae. Okay, why are people having problems sleeping? Because they're being exposed to this re-radiation coming from outside and then getting onto the coils. He then took out another meter, and we found out it was a radio station, so we could actually determine where it was coming from. It was a radio station at 103 FM, which is 103 megahertz or million cycles per second. And what he was telling me is that they failed to put on a filter that would have cost them $25 to prevent the radiation from getting on the wire. So it was in the building that we were in, and probably in all the buildings surrounding this particular radio station. Radio frequency can get onto wires, and it produces poor power quality or dirty electricity. And this is something that very few people are aware of. They think when they're sick in their homes that they're sick because the radiation is coming through the air, and they block the radiation coming through the air, and they're still sick. And the problem is that the radiation has come into the wire, and they're sitting much closer to it, and that's what's causing the problem. So what's the solution? With respect to antennas, they should be at least 400 meters away if they're cell phone antennas. If they happen to be broadcast antennas for radio or television, ideally they should be 2 to 4 kilometers away, because they're much more powerful. So their effects are felt much more closely. Water reflects radiation. We found that if antennas are put on water towers, the people living around them tend to get sick a lot faster than people living where it's just on a regular tower. So water towers, or if you're near the water, it reflects off the water and then it bounces back as well. So you can get higher exposures that way. There should be no antennas on or near transmission towers. There should be no antennas on or near schools or homes. We need the guidelines that are based on long-term biological effects. So far, the best guideline is 0.1 microwatt per centimeter squared. And I understand there's now even a more stricter guideline that's being recommended in Switzerland. So we'll see what happens with that, whether that's actually passed. You can buy screens or film. You can even there's a special kind of film that 3M makes that you can put on your windows that also reflects the radio frequency. It was first developed by the military to prevent eavesdropping, and it happens to be very effective. People who use a special glass that filters out ultraviolet radiation, it's a high-E glass or something like that, it's also effective at reducing microwaves, so it has some protective effect as well. You can put filters on wires to minimize your exposure, and I think we need wireless-free zones for sensitive people. I think that's absolutely critical. Now I'm going to shift a little bit and move away from wireless to wired. I've introduced it by the example in Bermuda, but I'd like to go beyond that and tell you what some of the other sources in your home that contribute to dirty electricity. This is what clean electricity looks like. It's a smooth 60 hertz sine wave, and hertz simply stands for cycles per second. We put the clean electricity into our computer does its thing, and it comes out looking like this if it's not filtered. You have these high frequency transients on, or microsurges on the electrical wire. And when I first got my first computer, we had to use them with surge protectors, because you would have these surges coming through and it would turn your computer off, or could easily damage your computer. And what they've designed are computers that can withstand surges now. And it turns out that, you know, our bodies are sensitive to these surges as well, and no one's redesigned us so that we can tolerate them. So we know that these surges exist, and this is what dirty electricity that's produced looks like. All of these things produce dirty electricity. Plasma TVs are notoriously bad, as are these curly, compact fluorescent light bulbs. They're making people sick, and I'll speak more about them in a minute. And dimmer switches are notoriously bad for producing this. This is all within your own home. Outside of your home, wind turbines, solar power that you're using as photovoltaic power, so you're converting the solar into electricity. It goes through an inverter. The inverter produces dirty power, and very often these homes will have very high levels of dirty electricity. Arcing on wires, if you have a tree growing near a electrical wire and it begins to arc, that arc is a spike, a transient that's sent all along the wire until it comes back to the source, and power lines and cell phone antennas. And so you can actually get quite a bit of dirty electricity coming into your home without you even generating it. Everything could be turned off and you'd still have it coming into your home from your neighbors. I'm going to just talk a little bit about compact fluorescent light bulbs, because the second most important thing that you can do in your home after you get rid of your deck phone is to get rid of all compact fluorescent light bulbs. When I talk to people who are electrically sensitive, one of the things they tell me they can't tolerate are fluorescent light bulbs. That includes the tube ones as well as the curly ones. And so I thought, well, let's find out what these light bulbs emit. So we did a study that will be coming out this fall that will show you what these light bulbs emit. This is an incandescent light bulb. We went to 2 remote regions, one in Ontario and one in Wisconsin, to do the testing because we didn't want anything interfering with our measurements, and we didn't want to do our measurements in a lead-lined building because we wanted it realistic. We wanted realistic exposure. So we went to 2 remote regions, and this is a compact fluorescent light bulb. This is an oscilloscope reading of what we found. Everything in red is on the wire, so we're measuring what's coming off the wire, and everything in blue is coming through the air. Now, this wire would normally have the 60 hertz oscillation as well, but we put a filter on it to remove that, so all we have is the noise. So this is just showing you the amount of dirty electricity that we have here. Whether this light bulb is on or off, the readings look exactly the same. So this is the background in this particular location. This is a compact fluorescent light bulb produced by GE, and this is what we get, right? Everything on the wire in red, everything through the air in blue. It's giving off these huge radio frequency signals, and it's coming through wire and through the air. There's a meter that we use to measure dirty electricity. I've got it here. It's a microsurge meter. It was designed by Professor Martin Graham and Dave Stetzer. Martin Graham is a retired professor at UC Berkeley, and Dave Stetzer is the electrical expert that I told you about, who came to Bermuda. And they've designed a meter so you don't have to buy expensive equipment like an oscilloscope, and you don't have to hire experts to come and do your testing. You can test them yourself. Compact fluorescent light bulbs contain mercury, so as soon as you break one, your home has to be treated as a toxic waste site. You have to open windows, you have to pick everything up with double rubber gloves, you have to dispose of the mercury and the fragments in a toxic hazardous waste disposal site. And if you go to the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, they have 2 pages on how to dispose of them if you happen to break one of these lamps in your home, entirely because of the mercury. They also generate ultraviolet radiation. Now they're coming out with these curly light bulbs that actually look like this. They have a double glass on them, and that's to reduce the ultraviolet radiation. So the ones with a double glass fixture, so they don't look curly, they look like an incandescent light bulb, but they're still fluorescent. they won't produce any ultraviolet radiation. They also generate the radio frequencies that I've shown here and produce dirty electricity here in red. Also, they're making people sick. Now, there are 3 groups in the United Kingdom who have come out against compact fluorescent light bulbs. They include the British Dermatological Association, Migraine Action, and Epilepsy Action. These people who suffer from migraine simply can't be exposed to these lights because it will trigger a migraine headache. And epileptics, it triggers not epilepsy, but it makes them feel very, very ill. They're extremely sensitive to any kind of radiation in the environment. I'm trying to think of when it was last year, I think in the fall of last year, Global did a special television show on compact fluorescent light bulbs. And they then did a follow-up show called 16 by 9 because so many people phoned in. This is an example of a woman in the United Kingdom who sat reading by a compact fluorescent light bulb. She has lupus, and this is what it did to her skin. This is what she looks like normally. So you can see that it can have some dramatic effects on individuals. Now, the good news is that you can measure it, so you know what you're exposed to. But even better news is you can filter it. And this is what the filters look like. I have one here somewhere. Oh, here it is. Okay, this is what a filter looks like. And actually, Walt, can I get you to come up and just unplug that for me, since you have 2 hands? This is a GS filter, and you simply plug it into an electrical outlet and it shorts out the high frequencies. Now, I've had this plugged in because I'm measuring the frequencies that we're exposed to. Can you read out some of those numbers?
1213, 1225.
Okay, so about 1,200 in here. The level should be less than 40. Now, I'm contributing to some of this with my equipment, but as soon as we can you plug in the filter for me again? So you can read out the numbers, 1,200 and something.
1128, 1115, 196.
So it's dropped to about 100 or 200 roughly from over 1,000. So I actually now travel with these filters because all hotel rooms have dirty power. Most homes have dirty power. I've had to put them into my home to reduce the exposure as well. And so you can see here, the levels here are about 488. One filter brought them down to 39. And ideally, the level should be under 40. Now, this room would need more than one filter because we could only get it down to 200. And this is where you buy the filter. Everyone asks me, so I'm just going to leave this on here. If you take that filter and plug it in and use the same light bulb, this is what happens. So you can see that the filter really reduces the dirty electricity. And the units went down here from 298, almost 300 down to 26. This is what we can start doing with our light bulbs if we can't use our incandescent light bulbs. Now, there have been a number of school studies looking at dirty power, and one of the most recent ones is a study that came out in California. Sam Millam and Lloyd Morgan were the 2 authors. It came out just last year. There was a cancer cluster among the teachers in La Quinta, California, and they looked at things like mold and chemicals in the environment, and somehow they couldn't find anything that would link to the cancer. And so Sam Millam recommended that they measure dirty power. And so they went in, measured the dirty electricity in the school, and they found that 13 rooms were called the hot rooms, where the levels on this particular meter were over 2,000. So that's as high as this scale goes. And for a teacher, if a teacher ever taught in one of those hot rooms, their cancer rate jumped to 410%. If they never taught in a hot room, their cancer rate was 80% higher than their equivalent cohort. And if they ever taught in one of those rooms and were at the school for more than 10 years, they had a 610% increase in cancer risk. The types of cancers that they found, the highest was thyroid cancer. And thyroid cancer is one of the cancers that we get if we're exposed to ionizing radiation as well as microwave radiation. Malignant melanomas, or a skin cancer, was very high. Uterine cancer, breast cancer was elevated by 30%, but it was not statistically significant. And overall, the risk of cancers in the school was 180% higher for the teachers. Sam Millam has started to now look at the students who have graduated from this school. It was a middle school. Some of the students are in their 20s and 30s, and unfortunately he's finding that young people some of the students who have graduated have cancer. So the answer is not very good. This is another school where they had a dirty electricity problem. In this particular school, it was in Wisconsin, and they had sick building syndrome. Once again, they assumed it was mold or chemicals. And what they did during the summer is they removed all carpets, they disinfected everything, and the teachers came back in the fall, and lo and behold, they got sick again. So did the students. They called out an electrician. It happened to be Dave Stetzer, who's also in Wisconsin, and he found that there was dirty electricity in the school. He put in filters, and this is what the school nurse reported from after the filters went in. She said that teachers are less tired, students have more energy, the staff have reduced allergies, students with migraines have fewer headaches now. But the most amazing result was for asthma. 37 students in the school had asthma, used inhalers on a daily basis, and after the filters went in, only 3 of them required inhalers, and only for exercise-induced asthma. These kids would go home and they'd still need to use their inhalers at home. They would come to the school and they stopped using them. And the reason they actually found this out is that the parents started calling in. The parents were responsible for buying the medication for their children. And when the inhalers were running out at home and they had to get a new prescription, they would call the school nurse and say, do we have to get another prescription for the inhaler for Johnny? And the school nurse would look at her record and she'd say, no, Johnny hasn't been using his inhaler for quite a few weeks now, unbeknown to the parents. And then she went through the records, and that's when she realized that this is what was happening. So this came as a totally unexpected consequence of cleaning up the power quality in the school. My first introduction to the filters was in 2003. I received a phone call from a woman in Toronto. I live in Peterborough, Ontario, which is just a little ways out of Toronto. And she told me that her daughter was electrically sensitive, that she had just started going to a new high school, and at noon her daughter was so ill that she would have to go home and lie down, and she would spend the afternoon sleeping. And she was convinced that it was dirty electricity in the school that was making her daughter sick. In 2008, I hadn't heard of dirty electricity. I knew about microsurges, and I knew they affected equipment, but I had no understanding that they would affect human health as well. And she told me that in the home she used these filters that she got from Wisconsin, and they seemed to help her daughter, and indeed everyone in the family felt better, including their pet dog, who was much less anxious after the filters went in. And she said that she had permission from the principal to install the filters in the school, and asked me if I would be interested in doing a study at the school. Well, I was convinced that these filters were probably bogus, that they couldn't possibly improve anyone's health to the degree that this woman was stating. And I thought, but even if we do a study and find out that the filters have no effect, that's still a relevant scientific investigation. So I agreed to do it. And we set it up properly with it was a blinded study, so the teachers didn't know what we were testing, didn't know about the filters. And when it came around to my analyzing the data, I actually delayed for quite a while because it would be putting a lot of data into the computer and then coming up with no effect. And so I delayed until the summer when I had a bit more time from teaching. And I analyzed the results, and I couldn't believe what we were receiving. I couldn't believe what the results were. So I thought I must have made a mistake. And I remember sort of checking them about 3 times. What we found was that 45% of the teachers' health improved when we put in the filters. Their energy level went up, their mood improved. We also asked them to document classroom behavior, and classroom behavior improved in the school. The school went from grade 1 to grade 12, and the elementary-aged kids improved the most. Middle school kids improved the second most, and the least improvement was in high school students. We've repeated the study at 3 schools in Minnesota, got virtually the same results. However, in those schools, 35% of the teachers improved significantly when we put in the filters. The high school students, once again, didn't improve. And we're trying to figure out why high school students aren't having the same response as elementary age kids. And we think it's because they're using cell phones. So although we're able to clean up the dirty power in the school, we're not controlling that type of radio frequency radiation. A lot of the symptoms at elementary that improved are the ones we now associate with attention deficit disorder. And what's happening there? The rates are increasing. They're going through the roof, and the kids are being medicated so that they behave, quote, normally. And I think it's some of the electromagnetic energy is responsible for their behavior. I met Dave Stetzer after the study, and he told me that diabetics also benefit from the filters. And I became really quite excited, because so far everything that we had been measuring was something that was subjective. I have a headache, I feel tired. And although you can rank how tired you are, it's still a subjective symptom. And we were looking for objective markers. And when he told me that diabetics improve, then we could measure blood sugar, so that was really important. And so we began to do research with people who have diabetes, and we've published our paper on this. I'm just going to show you two of the examples from that study. This is a woman who has type 2 diabetes. She's 57 years old. She lives in New York, and she didn't take any medication for her diabetes. She simply controlled it with eating properly and exercising. So when the levels of her blood sugar became high, by the way, 7 here is the sort of the ideal level for diabetics. When the levels got high, she would go for a walk, and after 20 minutes her blood sugar would come down. So it's gone from about 11 to about 6.7. Another day her levels were high, she had a terrible headache, she walked, her levels came down. Every single time walking for 20 minutes brought her levels down. Sometimes, however, she didn't feel like going outside, and so she would walk on a treadmill. This is what happened when she walked on a treadmill. Her starting level went up. After the treadmill, starting level went up. And you'll notice in each case it went up to roughly the same amount. Treadmills produce dirty electricity. This woman was exercising to improve her health, and she was actually doing more damage to herself because she's electrically sensitive. We think that this treadmill test is probably the test to check diabetics to see if they're electrically sensitive. If you're not electrically sensitive, your blood sugar will go down just like it did here. If you are electrically sensitive, it will go up, and you shouldn't be working out on a treadmill unless it's properly filtered. This is another example. This is an 80-year-old woman. I think it was in Texas, might have been Arizona, I can't remember now. 80 years old with type 1 diabetes. She injected herself with insulin twice a day. Her son insisted that they put in filters in her home, and she was convinced it was absolute waste of money, that she didn't need these filters. An electrician went in, measured her dirty electricity. It was 800 GS units. After the filters were put in, it dropped to 13. That was a 98% reduction in the amount of dirty electricity in her home. She measured her fasting plasma glucose level, so that's the blood sugar first thing in the morning when you wake up, which is one of the best measurements that you can get. On average, for a week before the filters went in, it was 9.5, and this was the range for that week. 7 is the ideal number again. After the filters went in, her fasting plasma glucose was 6.6. It still ranged quite a bit, sometimes went above 7, but that was a 32% reduction. And the amount of insulin she injected herself with dropped from 36 units to 9 units. So she was using less insulin, and her blood sugar was staying lower as a result. Now, we know that diabetes is becoming a terrible epidemic. Globally, the levels are going up from 1985, when there were 30 million diabetics worldwide, according to the World Health, WHO. By 2025, it's estimated that there will be 300 million diabetics. The rate is increasing dramatically. We have different types of diabetes, and one of them is called brittle diabetes. This is a type of diabetes that an individual simply has, their blood sugar just either spikes or falls unpredictably. They control their diet. Very often they're not on medication. They're controlling their diet. They're exercising, and then suddenly it'll just drop, and then they'll have to take sugar pills to bring it up. Or suddenly it'll just rise, and then they'll have to take insulin to control it. Well, we think that that type of diabetes is actually a type 3 diabetes, environmentally induced. And we think it's brought on by exposure to dirty electricity and radio frequency radiation. Some of the people who go into a doctor's office, their blood sugar will actually be a lot higher because of all of the dirty power in that doctor's office. And if the readings were taken outside, that their levels would actually be much lower. With diabetics, we can get a change within 20 minutes. We can move them from a dirty environment to a clean, and if we move them from dirty to clean, it'll drop. Their blood sugar will drop. If we move them in the other direction, it will rise, and it's just like a barometer. Once again, this has been published for anyone who's interested in looking at the paper. One of the teachers in the school in Wisconsin had multiple sclerosis, and she was in very bad shape. And after the filters went in, a lot of her symptoms disappeared. So this was quite encouraging. So I began to work with people who have multiple sclerosis. And we had quite a few volunteers. We talked to a support group in Oshawa, Ontario, and we got quite a bit of support. Now, this is going to be a little dark. This young man has primary multiple sclerosis, and this one has secondary multiple sclerosis. We went into his home and measured the dirty electricity, and he volunteered to participate in the study. He was convinced the filters wouldn't do anything for him. And I decided I was going to start videotaping people, because I had been to about 3 or 4 homes already with absolutely miraculous results, where people who walked with canes no longer needed their canes within a matter of a few days to a few weeks. And I couldn't believe the results, and I kept thinking, and we didn't use placebos, we used the real thing. And I thought, you know, the placebo effect is incredibly powerful. I was convinced that everyone, you know, it was in their mind, they thought this was helping them, and so their body responded. And the results were so miraculous, we started to videotape people. So this is one example. I asked him to walk down the hall. He now lives with his parents, and he's got these rails for him to hold on to. Normally he would walk with a cane. And we plugged in the filters, and this is 2 weeks later. Same distance, and look how fast he's able to maneuver it, and he doesn't have this drunken stagger. This is another woman who was sitting on her hands when I interviewed her. I asked her why. She said they shake, so I asked her to hold her hands out straight, and this is what you see. Her mother takes care of her during the day. Her husband takes care of her during the night. She can't feed herself. 6 weeks later, we returned, and this is what we found. No change of medication for any of these individuals. Now, the young man up here, he was convinced it had nothing to do with the filters. So after about a week, he was feeling a lot better. He stopped using his cane, and he went shopping with his father, and they went to one of these large box stores. Within an hour and a half, he couldn't walk back to the car. His father had to help him. And he said it took him 3 hours sitting in a chair before his nerves, the tremors went away. So what these individuals can do is they can live well in a clean environment. The minute they go into a dirty environment, if they stay long enough, their symptoms will come back. So this is not necessarily a cure for multiple sclerosis. So what are the consequences of having radio frequency on wires or through the air? Well, there's neurological disorders, there are blood sugar disorders, there's respiratory disorders, there's skin disorders, there's cancers, and there's electrical hypersensitivity. So we're really touching on a huge number of illnesses. I didn't put, well, the neurological disorders, we can actually put the heart rate, how it affects the heart, so cardiological disorders as well. Now, are you sensitive to electromagnetic energy? How electrically sensitive are you? Well, I've got a very short questionnaire, and all you have to do is count on your fingers if any of these things apply to you. And we're really asking if you're under the line here already with your exposure. So 20 questions, and just count on your fingers. Those who suffer from electrical hypersensitivity have the following reaction to shopping in a large box store. Confusion and poor short-term memory, also called brain fog. So they go shopping with list in hand and spend as little time in the store as possible. Some can't recall where they parked their car. So if that applies to you, that's number one, okay? Headache that becomes progressively worse the more time they spend in the store. Dizziness, numbness, tremors, and other neurological disorders. Nausea or feeling unwell. Fatigue and weakness. Problems with vision and or hearing, a buzzing in the ear. Depression, anxiety, and or other mood disorders. Okay, those who suffer have the following reaction to mobile phones. Feeling of warmth, that's usually the first symptom that you feel. It starts getting warm in your hand and you feel the warmth against your face. Numbness in fingers. Facial flushing on the side of the head where the phone is held. Headaches that become progressively worse and last longer with continued cell phone use. Eventually, some can't be in the same room with others who are talking on a cell phone. Compact fluorescent light bulbs, headache and other body aches, confusion and memory loss called brain fog, fatigue, dizziness, nausea, feeling unwell. Eye problems, including eye strain, leading to dry eyes or watery eyes, problems with vision, usually a fuzziness, a blurriness, so you have difficulty reading, and tired eyes. Ringing in the ears. Skin problems, including any combination of rashes, itchiness, and blotchiness, depression, anxiety, and other mood disorders. Okay, so that's 20 things that could have gone wrong with you. How many people don't have any of them? How many people answered 0 on the scale? Okay, just a few. Okay, how many people answered 1 to 5 on? Okay, you might be becoming sensitive. How many answered 5 to 10? Okay, you're definitely electrically sensitive. How many answered greater than 10? Okay, you're having some real problems now, and for you we need wireless-free environments so that you're not sick from this exposure. If you check several categories, you might be electrically sensitive. Those who suffer from this often associate their symptoms with aging and or living a stressful lifestyle. Unfortunately, if that was the case, then your symptoms would be constant. The difference between real aging and electrohypersensitivity is that your symptoms either disappear, they come and go. So if you're really, if you really have Alzheimer's, you're not going to get suddenly totally lucid if you're in a clean environment. But if you have electrical sensitivity, then it will depend on the environment that you're in. The more sensitive a person becomes, the faster the response following exposure, the more extreme the reaction, and the longer it lasts. The World Health Organization held a conference on electrohypersensitivity in Prague in 2004, and this is how they defined it. A phenomenon where individuals experience adverse health effects while using or being in the vicinity of devices emanating electric, magnetic, or electromagnetic fields. Whatever its cause, EHS is a real and sometimes a debilitating problem for the affected persons. Their exposure is generally several orders of magnitude under the limits in internationally accepted standards. Health Canada also recognizes this. They say, certain members of the general public may be more susceptible to harm from radio frequency and microwave exposure. This is within their Safety Code 6 guideline, but they haven't bothered to change their guideline to protect these sensitive people. What are the symptoms? The 5 most common ones include problems with the skin, problems with the brain, fatigue, pain, and chest issues with the heart. The less common symptoms are nausea, panic attacks or depression, seizures, ringing in the ears, ear pain, numbness, paralysis, dizziness, and balance problems. What's the prevalence of electrohypersensitivity? This is a letter that was published in Electromagnetic Biology and Medicine in 2006, looking at different communities that have looked at prevalence, and you can see that the curve is increasing quite dramatically. According to this study, by 2017, 50% of the population will have or will be complaining about these symptoms. The truth is, we don't know if all of these people are electrically sensitive, and we don't know, there are some people who are electrically sensitive who have never heard about it. So we've got some people who are not reporting and some people who don't have it. This could very well be simply an increase in awareness of the population to more things appearing in the media. The truth is, we really don't know what levels are electrically sensitive. I use a very, very low standard, and that's 3%. So 3% of the population, I think, are severely affected, at least 3%. Another 35 are moderately affected, and there's quite a large population who currently are asymptomatic. They don't have any symptoms. How many people does this apply to? Well, in British Columbia, with a population of 4.4 million, we're talking about 132,000 who have severe electrohypersensitivity, 1.5 million with moderate electrohypersensitivity. These people can still go to work, but they're simply not putting in 100% at work. They're far too tired and ill to do a good day's work. This is what some people have resorted to, wearing things to protect themselves. If you are electrically hypersensitive, these are the 3 things that are absolutely critical for you to do. One is to reduce your exposure to electrosmog, so you have to measure it to find out what it is. You have to build up your immune system by eating properly, taking the right nutrients, and working under the guidance of a good nutritionist. And you have to detoxify your body. That means getting rid of things like mercury and other poisons that you may have in your body. And you can't do that until you've done these two, because this will be too hard on the body. We've had scientists from around the world and medical doctors who have written resolutions, appeals, just trying to ask governments to do something. And some of the governments are quite responsive. In Canada, unfortunately, they haven't been. What needs to be done about electrosmog? We need to protect those who have become ill. I think that's #1 priority. And the second priority is to protect others from becoming electrically hypersensitive. How do we do this? One is through education. So the fact that you're coming here, that we're videotaping this, that will be made available to other people, will simply spread the message. The media has a very important role to play here. We have to educate doctors, so when patients come to them with the symptoms, that they're not sent to a psychiatrist for psychological counseling. And we have to alert parents and teachers and employers that we have to set up safe environments. We have to monitor the environment and reduce exposure. The key environments are your bedroom. So if you have to clean up one room in your house, it should be the bedroom. Elementary schools are the #1 priority, and the workplace. And finally, we need to get guidelines that actually protect us against this form of exposure. That's guidelines for antennas, but it's also guidelines for appliances, so that compact fluorescent light bulbs that make people sick are simply not allowed on the market. Health Canada really, and Industry Canada really dropped the ball on that one. And we have to establish wireless free zones so that people can move from one environment to another without becoming ill. What does the future hold? If we do nothing, if the Wi-Fi goes into schools, if we have WiMAX coming into communities, if smart meters and everything else, we are going to make a heck of a lot more people ill. If we do something, if we lower the guidelines, if we have wired routers in schools, if we establish radio frequency free zones, re-question smart meters and broadband over power lines, use clean light bulbs and clean appliances, we can actually improve the situation considerably. Facts don't cease to exist just because they are ignored, and that's what's happening. Health Canada is ignoring the facts and assuming that, this problem will go away. It won't. It's going to get a lot worse. The book that Camilla and I put together, we're making it available to people who attend the talks that I've been giving. And if you go to this website, www.electromagnetichealth.org, or you can get a 25% discount, so it'll cost you $15 US instead of $20. And you have to put this code in, so that will bring you the discount. And what we're doing with the funds from this is we're putting it into research, and we're going to use it to help people who have developed electrosensitivity to contact the media, and to help other groups that are making changes in this world, just like causes. So with that, I'd like to thank you, and I know there's going to be someone else speaking, and then we'll open it up for questions. Thank you very much.